In the early years of the Disciple Now student ministry movement, those events were very different from what is happening in many places today. It was a very organic process. What would happen is a youth minister that wanted his students to experience this unique weekend would enlist a group of fellow youth ministers from around their area, state, or even around the country. They would enlist enough so that there was one youth minister for every 5 to 8 students. They would also arrange for the same number of homes and the same number of support teams for food, encouragement, transportation, and so on. The youth ministers would devote the weekend, arriving Thursday for training and orientation and returning home late Saturday night, or if possible, after the Sunday morning service. And what did they get for this kind of commitment? $100 or so, and the well-used promise that the youth ministers with whom they had shared the weekend would become part of their Disciple Now network, willing to give their time away to help youth ministries in other churches for when they develop their own Disciple Now weekend. There were materials that were popular for the Disciple Now weekends. Billy Beecham, founder of Student Discipleship Ministries, had resources that were very popular in those days, and in fact are still available today. Student Discipleship Ministries had training workshops for these growing band of brothers and sisters so that familiarity with the resources and networking could occur. There were a variety of titles, all fill-in-the-blank type books, designed to walk participants through the doctrinally sound concepts that Billy had compiled for each topic. This kind of resource made it easy to bring in a group of leaders and make sure that all of the students got the same thing in every home. The materials were delivered early to the youth ministers so that they could study and prepare what Billy had written and be comfortable leading the students through the experience. Billy's concepts are really good. I'm a fan of Student Discipleship Ministries. They were very formative in my early years in youth ministry. But at a certain point, in the larger picture of shaping disciples, fill-in-the-blank and multiple guest processes stop being helpful. And I believe this occurs long before we might expect. If we expect our disciple-shaping efforts to actually grow disciples, and we have no plan to change how we challenge and develop those growing disciples, we may very well come to understand why so many stop participating or drop out altogether. We must continually provide challenging growth opportunities that align with the capacity of the disciple to be challenged as they grow. Otherwise, it might become more like reruns of a favorite TV show or movie where those watching already know the dialogue and the punchline. You see, my purpose in leading Bible study is not that everyone have the same pre-planned and pre-packaged experience, or that we maintain or grow attendance and participation. My purpose is that participants and facilitators, including myself, will experience life change that leads to deeper, world-changing commitment because we discover directly from the Father, His Son, and His Spirit from His Word. The last Disciple Now I served in was at First Baptist Church of Euless, Texas. But by this time in my life, I had grown weary of all the fill-in-the-blank and multiple guest questions as a way of developing world changers and facilitating life change. I had grown, and the vast majority of students in this particular Disciple Now at this particular church had experienced many retreat weekends as well as strong teaching weekly in their student ministry. Fill in the blank was not going to work for me here, and if it didn't work for me, it wouldn't work for them because I could not enthusiastically lead them to fill in the blanks. So this is what we did in our group, with the full blessing of the youth minister. I pulled out my leader's copy of the material in the first session with our group, and I told them that we would not be filling in any blanks, but if they really wanted to have the answers to the blanks, they were welcome to copy them out of my book at one of the break times. What I had realized some time before was that those blank lines consume the attention of participants. They're not engaged in the moment with God and His Word. They're listening for the answer for the blank in the material. Furthermore, once the blank is filled in, that information is mentally sidelined as they are now listening for the answer for the next blank. The overall functional value becomes to succeed in having all of the blanks filled in. And while that is not the intention or the heart of those who create materials like this, it is often, unfortunately, the result. What we did instead was talk through the concepts over the weekend. I covered the scope of the material, but we looked at Scripture together and discussed relevant, real-life circumstances that related to the discovery of the concepts that the material was addressing. And very often, students would see for themselves the truth of the concepts, but they would not use the same words that were pre-planned by the blanks in the material. And because they discovered for themselves and were able to discuss in their own words, they engaged at a far deeper, more memorable, and life-changing way with God and His Word. How do I know? Well, in a brief stand-up meeting with the pastor and the youth minister on that Sunday before the worship service, the pastor said to me, "God really fell down on your group, didn't He?" And He had, but not in some ecstatic way, but there was a noticeable difference in what happened in our group compared to other groups. And it wasn't because I was a great presenter. I had not even begun to imagine Solomon's quest at this point. I had simply identified for myself what works and what doesn't. And what works for me is the purposeful development of creator-level world changers. The word had somehow gotten out that these kids were considering and conversing deeply about God's work and plan in their lives, their struggles, and God's direction for them, even though they had abandoned the blanks that cried out to be filled in. What more could you want from one weekend of shaping teenage disciples? Discovery propels active and dynamic learning. You may think active and dynamic learning is happening when the speaker is active and dynamic, if he has great illustrations and is passionate about his presentation. It is not. In these cases, no matter how well-intentioned and well-prepared, the presenter is the one that is active, dynamic, and passionate, while the group members are entertained. It takes no deep thought process or engagement with God to enjoy the pleasant work of someone else. The circumstance is similar to an audience in the room of a stand-up comic or singer or band. Now, I am not saying that pastors and Bible study leaders are simply comics. But what I am saying is that there are similarities in the circumstances. The members of the audience are not funnier because the speaker is funny. They don't grow in humor, even if they have learned a few jokes they can repeat. They can't sing better or play an instrument because of the concert. Oh, they may praise the comedian or artist and encourage others to attend the next show or concert, but they have not grown. They have not increased their ability to be funny or musical, or to discover what's funny, or to be challenged to discover for themselves the humor of their own life experiences. This is actually passive learning on the part of the consumers while sitting in the presence of active creators of content. The presenter expends all of the energy in preparation, in study, in practice, in discovery, and delivery. The attendees consume that which is so energetically delivered by the content creator. And the proliferation of this style of Bible study actually reinforces the role of consumer in your church. Rather than developing consumers into contributors and developing contributors into creators, we find our creators in curriculum or books or DVDs to deliver content that consumers will value. And our contributors are only challenged to press the play button at the right time or ask the provided questions at the right time. They are not challenged to know God and His Word so well that they can own and be owned by God in the disciple-shaping efforts of others. We have gotten to this place in part due to mistaken inductive thinking and transitive reasoning. On the homepage of our website, solomonsquest.org, there's a Sunday comic from one of my favorite strips, Baldo, by Cantu and Castellanos. In this strip, Baldo's younger sister Gracie and her friend Nora are taking a walk through the woods. The strip begins with Gracie announcing, "Some explorers we are," and then explains while examining a map, "I think we're lost." Nora asks, "How can you tell?" Well, Gracie points and says, "See that giant maple tree? This is the third time we've seen it. You know what that means, don't you?" Well, Nora ponders and then in a fit of inductive, transitive reasoning states with great authority, "The giant maple tree is following us." Gracie quickly corrects her. with her own inductive transitive reasoning. No, 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 she says, it's lost too. You may or may not recall from your middle school math class the transitive property of addition. It states if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. For example, if 2 equals 2 plus 4 and 4 equals 3 plus 1, then 2 plus 2 equals 3 plus 1. This, of course, is so obvious that the transitive property makes perfect sense. However, it is invalid logic when it comes to people, relationships, and discipleship because there is an abundance of other variables beyond the simple alphabetic characters. For example, if I am my son's father and my son is his son's father, then according to the transitive property, I am my grandson's father, which is ridiculous. Try this one. Disciple development occurs in Bible study. Our church offers Bible study. Therefore, according to the transitive property, our church is developing disciples. I'll leave it to you to decide if this is effectively being accomplished in your church, but I'll also leave you with this true story. Years ago, I was a member of a church with an attendance of over 1,000 most Sundays. They had a variety of Bible study groups for all ages, including quite a few for adults. I had the opportunity to engage with 10 to 12 of these Bible study leaders in a weekend training event. Combined, there was more than 100 years of Bible study leadership in the room. These men and women had been leading Bible studies with approved curriculum for more than 100 years. I asked them early on to tell us a story about someone in their Bible study whose life had changed because of their Bible study. The silence in the room was deafening. After a few moments, one of the leaders offered that Johnny, not his real name, had begun reading his Bible every day. Now that is a great change for Johnny, and I don't want to minimize that, but there were no more stories. 100 years of leading more than 100 people in Bible study every week, and most could not describe the growth of one disciple in their group over all that time. It is true that studying the Bible is important in shaping disciples. It is true that this church offered many Bible study groups. What is not true is that disciples were not being made or shaped in the world-changing, life-changing kind of way. These are wonderful people, good people. They love the Lord, but they were victims of transitive thinking, just assuming that the holding of Bible studies was working, rather than measuring the outcome of the effort against the biblical expectation of growth, change, calling, sacrifice, and surrender. If this sounds familiar to you at all, please know that Solomon's Quest can help you change that in your church. Our discovery-based method can help you change what is happening in the lives of the people in your Bible studies, for your evangelism efforts, and in strategic planning as your church needs change and your vision grows. Don't forget to check out that comic strip on our website, solomonsquest.org, and while you're there, stop by the values page to see another favorite from the Zitz comic strip, yet another angst-filled teenager that I love. And as long as you're there, consider clicking on that button to schedule a zero-obligation phone or video conversation about how we could help you integrate the Solomon's Quest method into your existing Bible study, disciple-making, and disciple-shaping strategies. Check us out at solomonsquest.org.